for that introduction. I'm very excited to be a part of this panel discussion. Continuing with what Neelkanth said and made very important markers about how the economy might change, might not change, so we're going to hear more about that. I'm an academic, of course, and I'm not an economist. I'm a professor of marketing and social innovation. So I will predominantly take the discussion in the area of what happens to society in addition to what happens to the economy. And there are different parts of the society, the different segments of the society. How is AI impacting that? That is what we will primarily move towards. So some of the things that are things that we need to think about right now is what will happen in terms of the society in general and the economy in particular with the changes that are happening now. As a teacher, what I have found is as soon as ChatGPT came in, the way I had to design assignments had changed completely because I could not do what I was doing earlier anymore. So what does it mean for other people other than teachers? So to Professor Banerjee, I will ask you, does AI really serve the underserved segments of the society, like those who do not have any credit history for that matter? And can it play a role in financial inclusion? I did hear your talk earlier in the day where you were talking about what it does to when we have video kind of data and what it does to us and what AI can do. So I would like to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, thank you. I kind of did a bit of work on financial literacy. And so financial literacy's first problem is literacy. I think the way we see literacy is that we basically use symbols to express our thoughts. Whereas, I mean, AI might be helpful actually to improve that. We are, in the 75th year of our independence, we still have thousands of people who are still illiterate. So not only illiterate in terms of the language English we are using, presentations were in English, but even in local languages. But one of the things might happen, we might be able to leapfrog you see, literacy itself is a technology. So the illiterate people go and see movies and understand completely the stories. But give them a storybook, they'll not be able to enjoy it. Right? So what AI can do is to actually provide information through stories with visual and audio senses, right? So you don't really need any technology. You can go to the time when cavemen were there. If you see the cavemen writing, they were not writing anything, they were drawing pictures. So you can go back to those days and you can still provide them services, and they require these services and you can leapfrog the idea of literacy, numeracy even. And that, I think, is the exciting development if it can be done for a country of 1 billion people. As you said, engineering might be hard because there are people who can't, there are chips is not easy to make and stuff like that. But I see them a more inclusive technology coming in. And we have seen that with smartphones. So that's my take on that.
In terms of data analysis, for example, like you were showing an example with the video thing, do you think it would be easier to actually analyze more data that way with AI coming in, especially the government data which we have, census data we have?
Of course, what is the real difference between the AI technology in the past? We are still using the same statistical models. So the real difference is that 40 years ago, you needed a lot of computation powers to change. I studied at ISI, so even before my time, people, there was a role in the department called computers. So these guys used to calculate stuff, and so somebody multiplied, somebody added, somebody did the matrix inverse and passed it to next guy. So it's like a computer passing information to each other. And it took, days to compute a 3 by 3 matrix. And now you can do it in a second, and people don't even know how to do a matrix inverse. So computation has evolved. So I think it will evolve even more. So computation has evolved, and it will evolve more. And that would help in more inclusive and accessible. I mean, we have already seen accessibility of data models. I mean, this, the thing has moved on from people like me who are in the universities to people who are actually using it.
Thank you for that. This brings me to what you were saying, Neelkanth, that the healthcare industry and how you might not need doctors, or the amount of time it takes for a report to be generated, read that report, maybe diagnosis can be done faster. Makes me a little scared, like in any case when you go to doctors, you don't know what they're doing with you, and now machines will do it. So I'm like a little concerned about that, and I would ask you about it, like what are your thoughts on that, and also about education. Like what is the impact of AI on these sectors of the economy, healthcare and education?
Yeah, thanks. So I think that is where, at least for our economy, the challenges are the most severe. The problem with healthcare is that in order to make diagnostic tools, or starting with diagnosis, diagnostic tools to treatment, to even, say, performing basic surgeries, it is the biggest cost is the cost of a doctor. And it is not just about the number of doctors available, it's about where they are available. So there is a surfeit of doctors in the cities, there is a dearth of doctors in the rural areas. What AI or technologies like that, robotics, can do is, one, make it available remotely. So today, remote surgeries are possible, but with one simple technician, can you manage a cataract surgery? You can. And all of this is based on, the pictures of the eye, and using machine learning to figure out, where the needle should be inserted, how the lens should be taken out. And the moment you can bring down the unit costs to just capital, then things become very manageable. And then you can provide it at scale. So if a CT scan costs, say, 2,000 rupees, there is a certain number of people who can afford it. And because that number of people is mostly in the cities, there will be no CT scan available in the villages. Even in my hometown, it's very hard to get, and I grew up in Bokaro, it's very hard to get good quality diagnostics. The moment you can bring down the unit cost to 50 rupees or 200 rupees, suddenly it becomes available and accessible to everyone. It's like smartphones and how they penetrated. And I think a large part of product design, or even the usage of that product by trained technicians and trained doctors, is the cost of that CT scan or that diagnosis. And if you can bring down the unit cost by 1/10, I think the impact on morbidity, on mortality, I think on financial health, a lot of the financial distress in India is, the root cause is very expensive medical care. And similarly with education, it is a problem of getting high quality pedagogy, which is adaptive, to get it out to tens of millions of students. And I think the problem is you always have some good teachers, some good schools. I was reading this book called Invisible China, where they're struggling with the same thing. So in their vocational schools, maybe 5 or 10% of the schools are excellent, but 30% of the schools don't exist. They're on paper, they're taking money, but they don't exist. This is happening in China. And 40–50% are actually doing very bad quality teaching because you don't have good teachers. You don't have good teaching methods. And I think solving that at scale, remotely, and at low cost is something that AI can be hugely beneficial for.
That's very hopeful. But I'm also wondering that when one thinks about, if one looks at the number of doctors available and the number of doctors required in our country, this would, of course, be very helpful. That is understandable. But also, are we going to take the teacher out of the system? Like, are the teachers not required? That human touch not required? Human beings not required?
Okay. Let's look at both of these two questions differently. So the number of doctors in India, when you compare it to what exists in the Western world, and let's ignore the US. US is also underpenetrated. Say, let's take a better healthcare system like Europe. I think the gap is 6 or 7x, right? So, and therefore, I mean, the point is not to take doctors out of the equation. It is to see how the same doctors can be used to provide more services, or in many cases, have less trained technicians provide many of the services which the doctors provide today, and giving them the tools and the robust controls. On the education side, I think the problem is absenteeism. See, you look at any data on school education in India, primary, secondary, the problem is the teachers take money but they don't appear. So to say that teachers should it be, is it like very harsh assessment, teachers should be taken out of the equation? I don't think that's the point. The point is that fewer teachers, more motivated teachers are given the tools so that they can reach out to and give better quality education to more kids. And very often it is also about fiscal constraints. So Bihar and UP, which are the poorest states of India, spend 6% of their total expenditure on education. But per capita, it is 1/5 of what Kerala spends on education, because they don't have fiscal resources. So how do you bring down the pupil-teacher ratio? How do you make sure the teacher attendance is online? I mean, the UP chief minister very famously tried to take on the teacher unions, and even a strong chief minister like that had to pull back, because the teacher unions are so strong. So I think when you start to use technology more prudently, you don't just make it more adaptive, meaning, in any class, if there are 20 kids or 30 kids, the level of education is set by like the bottom 20%, or maybe the middle 30%. But if you can use technology, you can be adaptive, and actually the ability to train the good quality talents slightly better also improves. So there are significant gains to be achieved. I don't think teachers can be wished away or done away with.
Which also brings us to the question of other sections of the society. Like what about the gender issue? What are the caste issues? So I will ask you, Rajni, when loans are being disbursed, especially say microfinance, is the loan really going to the women, or is it going to the husband and who is doing business in the name of the wife? So is AI going to play any role in that, in really taking the money where you intend the money to go?
Let me step back a bit. The kind of revolution we wish there to happen in healthcare or education is something that we were wishing for financial sector maybe 10 years back. And thanks to all the data stack from the government, that whole jam trinity that we have now, that's a revolution that's at play right now in the financial sector. So the use case that you mentioned in terms of somebody muling for a female, or for in many examples of two-wheeler, female coming in for a two-wheeler without probably having a license or something, that's one of the easier use case for AI to handle. And it's built on simple theory that you can create, credit is a behavioral thing, right? So you can create 10,000 micro signals and get a 360-degree view of the client or the customer. It could be on its geotagging, it could be on its other relationship with the banks, it could be on the expenditure pattern. So that's something that's probably easier use case, and there is definitely a use case for that. All the fraud detection models that we have, that's exactly the problem that it's trying to solve. in financial inclusion to say. Gender is a smaller problem. There are credit data available that will tell you that around 50% of the credit eligible adult is still unserved. And another 16% is underserved. And underserved refers to the quality, the quantum, and at time when it needs. You have around 60% of MSMEs still talking about credit not available right when they need it, right? The gender gap is a smaller one. There are bigger gaps in terms of education. There's around 20% usage gap depending on how educated you are. So if you're better educated, you have better access to capital. And if you're less educated, you have less access. Now, that doesn't mean you need capital any less, right? Similarly, there is a use case around age. So if you are at 22 to 25 years, you probably, not really intentionally discriminated, but you have a less chance of credit being available to you, the right credit, transparent, affordable, and at the time you need, versus if you are a 35, 40 background, right? Now that's a problem that AI can very easily solve.
What about the elderly?
Now, AI is bringing to financial sector what was a concept in manufacturing and now in marketing as well, which is hyper-personalization or mass customization, right? So with the 10,000 data points that you have, it's easy to profile and miniaturize the information for each credit group that you are looking at. So this morning we had the gentleman from RBI kind of profiling each of the customer base that we have. It's possible for AI to do that customization of your customer base in a real-time basis. So by the time you have the data for somebody who's mulling or for somebody who's elderly, to kind of get that data, by the time they fill in the form, it's possible to have the total credit behavior of that person profiled and be able to provide them with the financial requirements that they have.
Like the diffusion of innovation question that Neelkanth was making, with the elderly population, it's difficult for them to adopt change. So in that context, like we know when internet banking happened, mobile banking happened, elderly population is not really,
So that is exactly what mass customization is about, right? So you know that there's a profile that's not very comfortable with an automated customer facing, and that's where as an organization it's easier to realign your workforce and
Makes
work
sense.
on a human level with that person.
Yeah. We were talking about diffusion of innovation, which brings us to the next question of technology adoption. And technology adoption in Global South, how do we think that would happen in terms of the way the Global North has behaved? Will the Global South behave in that way in terms of technology adoption? I was actually wondering, Neelkanth, when we were showing that graph, what was the source of that graph? Was it based on the projections that were made? Was it based on a particular geography, worldwide? How does it go in terms of technology adoption?
So that chart of where Acemoglu and Carino, I mean, so all of that whole spectrum of, I think that this is a global assessment or an impact on the global economy rather than just one single US economy.
So do we think the Global South is going to behave differently than the Global North in terms of the adoption of technology?
See, there is always a lag between, because see, like in any technology, the initial costs are very high. And therefore, naturally, a lot of the business solutions, the innovations that occur around it, occur in areas which can afford it. So if you see the total AI funding in India, today is still less than $10 billion. In the US, it is $150 billion. In China, it is $60, $70 billion. So as you can imagine, the countries that are ahead of the curve in terms of being able to invest, have the balance sheet to invest, will see solutions develop which are more appropriate to their environment and their economy. The Global South, because of its inability to invest at the cutting edge, is very likely going to be behind. But I think, like what we saw with, say, 4G adoption in India, we may be 7-8 years behind the rest of the world in adopting 4G. But because we are getting that cheap equipment, we are leveraging our own advantages, we still provide the cheapest 4G data in the world to the largest number of people. So there could be a time lag, but when we are talking about the impact on the economy, I think the Global South, with, say, a lag of 5-7 years, could actually perhaps be better off. The only thing we need to worry about is how concentrated the industry is. Because, see, if you look at the cost of compute, if today NVIDIA is very expensive, but I know of so many chip companies that are being funded that want to compete with NVIDIA, and by 2028, we'll be launching 2 nanometer, 3 nanometer products which will compete with NVIDIA. Similarly, everyone is funding large foundational models. The cost of compute and the cost of getting a query from that foundational model, if there is adequate competition, could be so cheap, could be so low, that maybe 10 years later, the Global South can also compete much better. So it's too early to say.
Okay. So this brings us to the next question of being an early mover in a market, right? So as an early mover, there is a question of diffusion of technology. There is also a question of you are making more investment, right? So I know that L&T Finance is doing a lot in the BFI sector, and if you consider yourself to be an early mover, what are the challenges of an early mover?
Oh, there are plenty. First, there are these unknown unknowns, right? I mean, I think of a term analogy of Jhoom Kheti, where tribals move first and then they know the pinpricks and the hedgehogs that they have to face till they have finally cleared the land, and then it's ready for others to kind of get in. So there are plenty of unknown unknowns, and you don't know what you are navigating through till you have reached some distance. Then there are known unknowns, and for example, when Kellogg's entered Brazil, it took them 23 years to break even, because they were essentially getting into a country which did not have the habit of having a breakfast. Or Star TV in India, where you kind of realize that women control the purses, and then you saw all the ad spends moving towards women and the shows moving towards women. So you know that there will be some of these revelations that will come through as you navigate through the landscape of hitherto really not explored the region. But what will come up is something that's unknown yet, right?
Would
so
it
those
grow
are the
the category then? Like, for example, by photocopier and Xerox became synonymous, but it also created a branding problem in some senses. So what would it mean for L&T Finance as an early mover?
I think early mover also comes with lots of advantages. I mean, Xerox remained Xerox for the longest time, and particularly in the data modeling perspective, you build in, you train your models, you bring in a market intelligence ahead of the rest of the competition. So by the time the others move in, you already have a captive model, customer base, and reach to niche areas that others will find it difficult to penetrate. But of course, in the process, you end up building what you would call public good in economic term. Right. So you do end up building, you do end up training your models in local languages, expressions, training them in nuances of how different languages, even within India, work. Or if you are working on, let's say, that whole lie detector that we were hearing about in the morning, what nuance really gives me a sense of, is the person's intent to pay, how strong is that intent? So those are the nuances. You do end up doing some good, you do end up having an early mover advantage, and it does come with its own challenges.
I love the idea of AI for good. It brings us to the question, Professor Banerjee, what would early movers of AI in general and in the financial sector in particular mean for Indian players and the Indian economy? I know that you definitely work on India, and you also teach in a university in UK. So keeping that in mind, like, how does it work?
Early movers, I mean, one of the things about technology is you might get stuck being an early mover, because if you remember Betamax versus the debate of, so you might get stuck into a bad equilibrium. Even now, if you look at historic technology, the fact that India or the developing world, I mean, going back to the question of whether we move first, is that the advantage of a developing world is that we don't have legacy technology, so we don't have sunk cost. So sunk cost is a big thing. And think about the trains, so 96% of Indian railways is electrified. 35% in UK, which was the origin of trains, is electrified. 0% in the US. So it is sometimes better to be late, but better to be, not never, but at least better to be late so that not having a large sunk cost. Of course, the other side of the story is that there is an early mover advantage. So it's not a zero-sum game, but it's a careful balance between whether you get stuck in a bad investment or you can, but it's in the future, so you cannot figure out. I mean, that's that the English couldn't figure out there would be electric trains in 1800, but we started late, we could do it, and they couldn't. So it's the only time you can tell, because whether we are making bad investments or not.
And it's also, if I may add, the point of early mover is in what? In the sense that a lot of the basic science development that happened in Europe was actually converted into economic innovations or deployed as economic innovations in the US in the late 19th century, in the early 20th century. All the basic hard science work happened in Europe, but the commercialization more or less happened in the US. If you track the technology industry, most of the innovations on the chemical side, because remember that before the chip is ready, it is actually metallurgy, it is not semiconductors, or it is not electronics. Only after the transistor and the chip is made. So on material science, the Japanese are way ahead of the curve. But the countries that have benefited the most have been Taiwan, Korea, and China. So I think when we think about whether we are ahead of the curve or behind the curve, it is about which part of this chain from invention, innovation, and diffusion are we really talking about?
Yeah, got it. So, I'm also thinking that banking is something that I remember that when we were in school, and I'm from West Bengal, we used to have a piece by Jerome K. Jerome called Three Men in a Boat. Yep. And it talks about how scary it is to go to a bank and open an account. The guy eventually got scared and walked away and did not open the bank account. So I'm wondering, this technology, which is new technology, so to say, my students, for example, did a project on the customer journey of Cyclops, which is their new two-wheeler segment product, and found some interesting insights on two-wheeler loans. Now, ATM or mobile banking or UPI did something for the consumers, right? So, however, effects were varied across different segments, whether it's elderly, time-poor consumers or resource-poor consumers. So will AI bring in a revolution in banking in true sense of the term, or will people still be, some sections of the society, especially the underserved, would still be scared?
Well, I think it kind of depends on the middle management because sometimes you do up innovation and then the middle management messes it up. I remember, 7 years ago, I was in Kazakhstan, which is not in the radar anymore. So I had to open a bank account. And I remember all I had to do is in front of a video camera, I showed my passport. The video captured everything. This is 7 years ago I'm talking about. The video captured everything and made me an account and gave me not a physical card, but an electronic card, and I could do all the transactions using that. Back here, I still have to go to the bank. They take my passport, take a photocopy. There is no scanner. Take my photocopy of that. I have to countersign each of the 6 signed passport copies, and then wait, at least 50 minutes to do anything. And even then, people call me and say, "Your signature is not matching." So if this me somebody who is probably more educated, I have a feeling that I hope this gets solved by the system much more better than.
So Neelkanth, what is your view on that? Like Professor Banerjee obviously had.
You should
50.
come to Axis Bank. No, we do it far better. No, I think see many of the frictional costs. I mean, the reason why the banks insist on all of those countersigns and the photocopies is just that is a regulatory requirement, right? And so like, now in Aadhaar we have face authentication, and it is very robust. We have tested it out, it scales well, it's very fast. And, but, face-based, I mean, KYC is still a challenge. Face auth-based KYC is still a challenge because of regulatory factors. But the reason why those regulatory checks and balances exist is that there tends to be a lot of fraud. There's a lot of money laundering. And I think what AI and tools like that do is enable runtime checks on fraud, runtime checks on money laundering, runtime checks on authentication. And like, in Aadhaar, we are starting to use a lot of AI and ML where people who try to fake IDs or generate fake Aadhaars, or, they get caught because we have those engines running in the back end. So I think some of the trust issues, some of the transaction cost issues can be significantly addressed by AI. Access issues, as Professor Banerjee again mentioned, that engaging with a computer using voice. What's wrong with that? And there can be voice recognition. So it's not that someone else can give the instruction to your bank account and get it done because the computer recognizes your voice. And I think those solutions, as they emerge, I think the penetration, diffusion of these banking services and the seamless nature in which you can transact in bank would become even better than it is today.
So, Rajni, what do you think about what is AI really expected to bring to the consumer? So, if I'm a consumer, what are you offering to me with AI that you have in your kit now?
If I were to put it in one sentence, I bring in financial inclusion, which is a very transparent, affordable, and the exact financial service that you need in almost real time. That's where we are. There are some frictional costs at this point of time, but that's what it brings to the consumer, which means you could be an elderly and not comfortable with online transaction. It's easier for financial service players to kind of quickly work around their workforce and serve them in person. You could be a 20-year-old looking at a very quick credit on the go. It's easier for, again, financial service players to cater to that section almost real time. You could be looking at a lending for your SME, and you have probably not good enough prediction of your cash flow analysis, but there are these AI models that will help you get this served almost real time. So
and what would it mean for you as a provider? Like, would it be more profitable for you? What would it mean for the economy in general?
So, all the productivity estimates that we saw right now, we're at a broader economy level, right? It varies across sectors, it varies across players. There are pockets where it's higher, there are pockets where it's lower. The rough estimates, at least as per what I have read, is around 35 to 40% reduction in costs. So that's flat out there. There is this whole gain around miniaturization of services. So you're able to kind of work around exactly as per the customer needs, so better customer satisfaction, larger customer growth, business growth. There is also the whole learning model that you develop where you start getting that what I called as early mover advantage, because now you have you have a bigger model, you have larger customer base, you are able to train them better for what you are offering. So as a player, it kind of brings in an inherent strength in terms of, somebody mentioned revenue per employee, I think, as a matrix. I think it will start reflecting there very, very quickly.
That all sounds very hopeful. I'm not sure how much time we have for question answer, and if we do have questions, then if the panel would like to take a few questions. Yes, please. Maybe you can name the person for whom the question is directed?
Lata has a question, yeah.
Okay, well, very quickly an observation and then a question. I was thinking of this signature mismatch and stuff like that. Even as recently as early 90s, imagine where the share market was because so many shares could not be transacted because of signature mismatch. And then with dematerialization, look at the amount of inclusion. So I'm very hopeful. Likewise, even KYC, Digiyatra has given as a formula. If that is introduced into banks, then, we solve KYC. I am hopeful on those accounts. My question is much more stock market and much more technology. Neelkanth, if you please, since this is up your alley, immediately, how is AI likely to impact, say, tech stocks or GCCs? We are earning a lot because of services exports, both traditional IT, legacy IT, as well as GCCs and other services exports. Should we be worried? You give the impression that AI will hit much later in terms of labor. But immediately, any thoughts?
It is already hitting in the sense that if Google says that 25% of their code today is written by software, by AI, it is something that is already happening. So I know of tech startups, some of them listed, internet companies, where they have stopped hiring new developers. They have fired all their designers. So there are 3 designers running a whole portal. So even for our Indian IT companies, the tech companies, I think the first impact will be on productivity, meaning they'll be able to write, say, 25% more code than they would have written otherwise. But will they be able to bill more for that? Because remember, it's a time and material business. So you're generating more code with the same billing rate. So in a way, if the IT budget for the customer is fixed, they are getting more out of it, but there are no more jobs, additional jobs. Same for, say, CRM. So there are companies that promise that I can bring down the number of calls that get handled by AI. So 20% of the calls get handled by AI. There is a 20-25% boost that can happen to every call center operator because AI is prompting them into the right direction. And then over time, another 20-25% gain can come because they can change the product based on AI assessing which product features are getting the most customer calls. But the way I see it is that in the first phase, maybe this will mean that the number of operators you need is a lot fewer. But as the cost of customer service falls, more and more companies can start offering personalized customer service. And therefore, I don't see a massive disruption happening in terms of massive job losses. And even if that was to happen, I think it will be more counterfactual, meaning a lot of jobs that could have been created may not be created in this sector. But I don't see this as necessarily impacting, say, forecast earnings in FY25 and 26, if that helps.
Hi.
We have just 1 minute left, so one question.
I'll finish it in half a minute.
Sorry?
I'll finish it in half a minute.
Sure.
This is for Professor Dr. Mishra as well as Dr. Banerjee. You referred about health sector as well as education. Today, we are sitting here in this Geo Hall for last almost 6 hours. In a day, 300 mother and the child dies because of lack of medical provision. That means we put 300 women in a plane every day, and from Bombay to Delhi, it goes and crashes every day. Can the government sit tight on this issue? And if it is, why? Number 2, to Dr. Banerjee. Sir, you mentioned about the banking discrepancies which is happening even today. Can you tell us, in your experience, what is one thing which India should adopt to shorten these anomalies? Thank you.
You want to take?
I didn't understand the question very well, actually.
So if I can just kind of re-articulate, did you say that with the health problems, can we sit tight on it? Was that your first question?
That is for Mr. Mishra.
Yeah, you meant the IMR, MMR? Is that the...
Yeah, I think he said with so many people dying, can we sit tight on that?
Women, especially
dying.
mother.
You mean MMR, right?
300
Maternal mortality
mothers.
rate.
Every day.
Yeah,
It is
so
happening
MMR,
even today.
Yeah, so so this problem also highlights the limitations of what AI can actually solve. So a lot of MMR, the maternal mortality rate in India or in sub-Saharan Africa or in other areas where it is shockingly high, is because a lot of deliveries happen outside hospitals. Now, how do you solve that? And AI is not going to solve that problem. So, frankly, from the purpose of this discussion, I think these are important challenges. Should the government be working on them? 100%. Is South Asia and India the place where, over the last 15, 20 years, MMR in percentage terms has come off the most? Absolutely. So the number of maternal deaths, despite the population growth, is down by 67% in the last 15 years. Is it still too high? 100%. Can it be addressed using AI? I don't think so, because those are social, behavioral issues, and I'm not sure those issues are worthy discussing here.
I see. I kind of agree because, at the end it's knowledge, right, only, and it's not implementation. So knowledge and implementations are two things. Same with kind of the education sector. Though Professor Sugata Mitra, he kind of invented the idea of using computers to teach people, and is pretty successful. In that terms, the hole in the wall experiment, if you look it up, he does something similar to that.
You do not need teachers there.
Yeah.
Students could learn on their own, basically. Yeah, if you just give the machine. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.